Welcome to the Base Coat Brainiac podcast. My name is Austin Hauser. I am Chief Brainiac over here at Base Coat Marketing. And if you own a painting business and you're listening in, you're in the right place. So today I am joined by the VP at John Neill Painting and Decorating out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and author of The Full Circle Business, a productivity book designed to help business owners calm the chaos of running a business. Suhaiba Neill, I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I just interviewed another contractor outside of Philadelphia yesterday. So you guys in that city are keeping me busy this week. So Suhaiba, I'd like to start with you. Can you just give us a brief rundown of who you are, how you got here today, and why I'm talking to you?
Sounds good. Yes. So Suhaiba Neill, suburbs of Philadelphia. I am a second generation in a family business, so 49 years in business total, and I'm going on year 20 myself of being involved. We are primarily a residential painting company, and it's interesting because maybe, I don't know how many years ago, Sherwin-Williams did a survey and talked about the average size of a painting business, and I never thought of us as being big, but we're kind of in that top 1% on size of how many guys, and I say guys because we still have guys, we run in the field, so anywhere from slow season, we may be down to like 30. In the busy season, we could go as high as 40. So pretty big company. And with that came a lot of chaos, which is where the consulting came in. So I joined the business and didn't realize my sweet spot was kind of systems and processes. And that's how my brain, I feel like the world is a puzzle. And created a lot of systems for myself for the things that I was now going to be responsible for. And then branched out into other areas of the business to create systems to essentially calm the chaos. So as you grow, consistency gets hard if you don't have a system or process in place. And then I guess right before the pandemic, was sharing at one of the paint expos how I created this circle and put these systems in place. And a colleague of mine was like, yeah, you need to share that with the rest of us so we don't have to start from scratch and reinvent the wheel. And that's where the consulting company came from. So the Full Circle Business, and the whole reason it's called the Full Circle Business is because it's based on a circle, which we'll chat about today, on how to add systems and processes behind the scenes to deliver an exceptional customer experience.
Okay.
So that was 2020. And now here we are.
So
a fun year to start a business.
Yeah, right. Exactly. 2020. Yeah. Things have really been a roller coaster ride in this industry since then. I like to mention that like the COVID gold rush is what we looked at, like 2020 through 2023 was, and we're back to pre-COVID levels now. But I really consider systems and processes like the unsexy part of a business that a lot of people just overlook. But it is, in my opinion, the most critical part of running a business. We have 29 team members here at Base Coat Marketing today, and our entire company is built on systems and processes. So let's talk about that, because it's something that unless you have systems in place, you are bound to repeat the same mistake again. And that chaos was just going to keep coming up. So, what does the evolution of a painting business look like based on your own experience?
Yeah, and so I tease too that like you don't necessarily need them depending on where you are, but if you want to grow, you will need them eventually if you want to be consistent with things. So when I joined the business, wasn't quite where it is now, and we continue to grow. I always tell customers and clients, like, if you're good at what you do, your business is going to grow naturally, and it's a matter of kind of keeping up with all of that. So first stage is common sense, where you just you pick up your brush and your ladder, and you've got some customers. A lot of people start out with referrals, friends, family, and then before you know it, you've got an actual legit business, and you hire a couple of employees. And I always say, like, once you have more than 3 crews, was probably when you really need to start kind of like systematizing things and getting consistent. So the goal with every system for me is as simple as possible, as easy as possible, and simple and easy aren't always the same. Repeatable, because you want to be able to do it over and over and over again, and then universal. So like the system that you use should be universal. It shouldn't just be Austin's way. It should make sense for, if I show up at your, decide to come work for you, you should be able to say, hey, this is how we do what we do. And I should be able to kind of get into the fold pretty quickly with the systems in place. What happens, I find a lot, and I tease people too, like, the reason I know this is because I've been there and done that. So like with my teenage daughter, I'm like, some lessons you have to learn on your own. Some lessons you don't have to learn the hard way. If you're a painting contractor and you don't want to learn the hard way, what brute force really feels like and like hitting your head against the wall, already been there, already done that. I can help you avoid that. So in that middle, like I said, you get big and you're successful, but like you mentioned, you're running into the same issue over and over and over again. And I usually tell people when you find that happening, pause, figure out why does this keep happening and how can I address it. So if you create even just a short system, one that I always go back to, I tease that checklists get a bad name and a bad rap. Like nobody's like, I don't need a checklist. But you know what a checklist really does though? It eliminates all the stress of delegating. So we have a checklist and our guys have used it for so long now that they don't really need it, but we still have it.
Sure.
This is how you start a job. This is what we do every day on the job, and this is how we close our day out. And then this is how we successfully end the job completely and move on to the next job. And what I tell people happens is the foreman knows it because he's been doing it for years. But what happens if he has to hop off of the job site and go do something else for a couple hours? And now the crew's there and they haven't been doing this for 20 years yet, and they have to close down for the day. Now I'm like in panic mode. Am I going to forget to do something? Am I going to goof something up? If I have a checklist, I can just look at it and say, oh, let's make sure I get all the trash together, make sure all these doors are closed. I'm not going to let anybody's pet out. If the homeowner's home, let them know, hey, we're done for the day. We'll be back tomorrow morning, same time. We're going to start, in this space. So it just makes it easier for everyone to work successfully with less stress of having to remember all of the things and all of the steps. So the final stage is called best practices. And again, that's where you have all of these systems and processes in place. And what happens is when you hire somebody new, it's almost like plug and play because they come in, this is your role, this is what you're responsible for, this is how we operate, here you go. And it just makes it easier to get people on board quickly and successfully and keep that customer service consistent across the board from every job.
So good. And you mentioned a few points here that I want to hit on because this is really important stuff. And that is the fact that they need to be simple and easy processes. So I think it's really honestly, I don't think it's hard to develop a process, but it's hard to develop a process and a checklist that people are actually going to use. And there's a fine line there, right? And can you maybe elaborate as to what simple means? Because there is a phrase in the world of business that simplicity scales, complexity fails. And
Right.
there's that line where people develop these SOP libraries and you can fill up an entire binder full of shit. But then who's actually looking at that? It's collecting dust on a
Right.
shelf. So how
Yeah.
do you approach that from your side?
Yeah. And so we have like the full employee handbook, and then we have a smaller book that's for like all the foremen. And then we literally boiled it down to one page and it's double sided and it's called Rules of the Road. So this is it. Like, how are we going to like take 50 pages and then get to 10 pages and then get to one page? So for me, and I always tell owners as well, as the owner of the company or the leader of the company, it's your job to decide and define what needs to happen. And the other thing I see people miss a lot that's really helpful and critical in that whole buy-in process, especially if you're going to put a system into place, is explaining why. So if I just hand you a checklist and said, hey, go do this, and like I walk away and we don't have a conversation about it, depending on you and your personality type, I'm actually in the process of getting disc certified. So if you're a high D, you can be like, I don't need this. I know what I'm doing. But if I explain to you why, I want you to reference this every once in a while and just kind of double check and make sure that we're all on the same page and that the actual ultimate goal is that the customer is happy, then it clicks at a different level and then you get some buy-in. And then I always tell people when it comes to the how, do a brain dump. This is how I do it. Ask somebody else to review it. Did I miss anything? And then if you're implementing a new system, I always use a little like um, play on words, try, track, and tweak. So hey, we got a new system. We're going to try it for a little while. We're going to track it. I want you to keep tabs. Like, is there something missing? Is there a way we can combine two of these steps into one step and make it easier? And then let's tweak it to get to the optimal place. So I tease that no system is perfect on day one. Like, you have to use it, you have to go through the motions, and you really have to, especially depending on how far apart you are from the people in the field that are actually doing the work, you have to get input from them because they're the ones that are doing it all day, every day. So, like, my dad was on the brush 48 years ago. So to ask him, what the procedure should be at this point for starting a job is probably not the best thing to do. But the guy that's currently doing it, he's gonna have a lot of good feedback. Oh yeah, you know what the customers are really prefer if we call before we pull up into the house, so they actually know we're on the way and like they don't look out the window all of a sudden and see us in the driveway. So try, track, tweak, get feedback, and just like you said, again, every once in a while revisit, is this the simplest way to do it? Is there something else we could tweak or change that'll make it easier, better, more effective, and just be open to that process?
Oh man, context is so important. It's one thing to lead a team by pointing and telling somebody what to do. It's another thing by having them understand why they're doing that thing. And I know you and I were on the PCA panel for leadership, and I think that's where a lot of this resonates between the two of us. Is just our leadership style. You mentioned one thing I want to touch on, and that's the DISC assessment. So we personality test everybody coming into our company, and that is, for a few reasons, but really it's just to understand how they tick and whether or not they're going to get energy from the role that they're in. Like
Yeah.
there's different personality types, and I think the big ones that everybody are most aware of is introvert, extrovert. And you don't want to put an introvert in a customer facing role. That's going to drain them, right? They might be able to do it. They're just not going to be happy doing that long term. And I always say that I wish everybody wore their DISC assessment on their forehead, because it would be so easy to understand and interact with people and have conversations and understand why they act the way that they do. But that's not the real world. But how does the DISC assessment fit into processes and systems on your side?
I think number one, and the thing that I talk about the most in like with the consulting, and then I wrote a book on leadership, is awareness. So I think the more aware we are of who we are at the core and how we operate, the better we can communicate with the rest of the world. The thing that's interesting about DISC that I discovered in my training is most people don't use assessments until there's an issue. I'm like, well, wouldn't you want to just know how you were hardwired right from the door? So like we're not waiting until there's a conflict or an issue and figuring out how to solve it. So being aware of how you work best, and then also, like you said, how other people operate so that you can communicate more effectively is essentially the goal of DISC. And it's interesting that we talked about on our training call yesterday, like what role certain people will be good in. So technically, you could do anything, no matter what your DISC profile is, but you may not love it. It may not make you happy. It may, like you said, drain you at the end of the day. And having that level of awareness and understanding, and then that goes back to like running the business and being a leader and making sure the right people are in the right seats and that they're in a job that feels fulfilling to them. Um, that's ultimately, like, I think as a leader, that's my goal. So I know in our business, our guys are the reason that we are where we are. And so how can I make your day better? How can I make your life easier? What can I do to support you? Is my mentality as a leader um, in the painting company.
So it does bring up a question, because I think where a lot of people fail on these personality tests, and personality assessment might be the better word, because there's no right or wrong answers, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people look at the assessment and they don't understand it. And I think the lack of understanding and how to take action on that's what's really important. Where my
Yeah.
eyes were really opened up was when I joined a coaching program, and they literally laid out a profile, kind of what we should be looking for each position in the company. And that's
Yeah.
where everything started to really click. And I know you can go a lot deeper than that, but for somebody who's never given anybody on their team, their estimator, their salesperson, a DISC assessment before, where should they start? What should they be looking for? Is there some sort of like a map of the profiles that fit best in each position?
There is, and again, there isn't. So, like, we did it with a bunch of our guys, and we would think like, oh, we're gonna find like a commonality, and they were kind of all over the place. The one thing I will say that I did learn in actually sales training before I started the disc training was the population, generally speaking, is pretty evenly split between like, actually, I think D is lower than the I and S and the C, but entrepreneurs, I think at least 70+% of entrepreneurs are high Ds. And
Uh,
if you think about it, you have to have the guts to go for it. Like, I'm going to open a business. I'm like, if you are too worried about rules and restrictions and, all that stuff, which is the high C, you want everything to be correct. You're not going to have that kind of drive to take the risk on making, something out of nothing. So the flip side of that is what I've discovered in the consulting work, a lot of business owners just aren't hardwired for systems. It's just not how your brain is hardwired. So I tease that I'm second generation. My dad is a very high I. Like, he could tell you anything. And you'd be best friends by the end of the conversation. And it's funny because when he does sales, it's not really, he's not talking about paint for very long. He finds something else that he connects with the customer on, and then they have these long conversations. And then at the end of the day, like, oh, yeah, by the way, here's a check, come back and paint the house. So, me, I'm not a traditional entrepreneur because I was second generation. So, I'm very high in the S and the C, which is steady, consistent, correct, accurate systems and processes. So, the good and the bad news, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it, is if you're a business owner and you feel like I don't know how to do this, it's not your fault. Like you said, there's no right or wrong. It's just kind of how we're hardwired. And that was my goal, was to, because it was my sweet spot, which took me a really long time to figure that out. Like, here, I'll give it to you. So now you don't have to figure out something that you're not naturally even good at to begin with. So I think what I have seen in DISC so far for kind of service facing roles is, like you said, a high I is good for customer facing things, potentially sales, and then a higher S is good for production. Somebody that's going to be consistent day in, day out. They're going to show up, they're going to get the job done. They're not super worried about, like, oh, I don't have enough people to talk to make sure that, I'm feeling energized throughout the day. So there are some styles that suit certain roles maybe better than others, if that's the right word to use. But again, anybody can do anything. And one of the things that we're working through too is, on top of DISC, there's like what motivates you. So like, how DISC is how you're hardwired, and then you talk about motivators, like why. This is why you want to do what you do, and what motivates you. So there's a lot that comes into play with it. But I think, like I said, the more you are aware of how you operate and kind of what the ideal environment for you is, the easier it becomes to work well with others.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, I think we touched on this at the PCA in Orlando. Is one of the questions that we ask every incoming employee is, what's your why? Why are you here? We ask them to close their eyes, think about it. We want to hear their emotional response, because that is actually what they're going for, right? That's why they're here. It's less to do with, the job, and more to do with, do they want to go on vacation a couple times a year? Do they want more freedom in their life? They want, what is it that they want? And that allows you to motivate them effectively. And I think it's just about asking your team the right questions and understanding how they tick. Because to your point, somebody who's high D and I could potentially be a good operator. It just might not be naturally hardwired that way. But also understanding how you are. So I'm very high D, very high I, but I put an operations director who's high S and C, and as a result, it's a good fit. It's a good pairing. But it's important, I think, to understand where your team fits in, because generally speaking, every single problem is either going to be a people problem or a process problem. And in order to identify that, you need to know your people first. But you did mention something I want to touch on. Yeah, you mentioned right people, right seats. Do you guys run on EOS over there?
Sort of. So I read it, and I teased my coach, is like, what do you mean it didn't work? So we tweaked it a little bit. And again, I'm that person where if you hired me as a consultant, I'm going to give you everything in a Word document, and I literally want you to change it. Like, I don't want you to use it exactly the way I gave it to you. I want you to customize it so it really makes sense in your world. So I think in just the contracting world in general, the foundation's really pretty much the same, but how you run your business is really different, and everybody's just a little bit different. So we read traction, use EOS, kind of have that whole 90-day thing in terms of like quarter by quarter, what do we need to accomplish? I tweaked the level 10 meeting a little bit because we were getting stuck on one of I can't remember which one it was, but the order
Yeah.
for the way our office works, we were getting stuck and not getting through it all. So I tweaked it to make a little bit more sense for us. And yeah, so right people, right seats. And what I've seen over the years is really smart business owners do what you just said you did. You hire to fill the gaps. So there's another really great book called Strength Finders, and it talks about how there's probably like 3 to 5 things you're just naturally really good at. And instead of trying to get better at something you're not good at, if you focus on what you're just naturally good at, you can get better much, much faster. And when you go through all of that, like I tease, I did all of the assessments one year because I wanted to get a really like full picture and a lot of overlap, and then it really made sense. Like, yeah, that's right. If you're a certain way and you hire, the successful owners I've found have hired assistants or office managers that fill that gap for them. and round the team out. And again, in the field, it's interesting in like the journey through leadership and discovering like what that really means. Not everyone's a leader of their life. Not everyone's meant to lead a company or lead a team or be in charge. And that's absolutely okay because you need leaders and you need employees. But as the leader, understanding that people who aren't hardwired for like that leadership spot, they want stability and they want consistency and they want security. And that's really where the systems and the processes come into play. When you show up at work and you know on Monday morning, my paid's going to be ready, my worker is going to be ready, I'm going to have the customer's contact information so I know where I'm going and who I'm going to meet with when I get there. And when this job is done, the next job, it's going to be the same thing. I'm going to get everything I need to start successfully as opposed to showing up on Monday and everything's not ready and now I'm stressed, because I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what I need. So as a leader, I think it's really important for everyone's success that you have some systems and processes in place to help people not be stressed about what it is they're responsible for and how they're going to actually execute successfully.
Yeah. And when you talk about security, another word you can use there is certainty. Your employees, your team wants certainty in their life that when they wake up the next day, that their job's going to be there, their family's going to get fed, and they're still going to have a job. And it's really, I think, from a leadership standpoint, important that we establish those processes and give them the certainty and the ability for them to just pave their way through their job, which most people, I would argue, enjoy and appreciate. I think there are some personality types that love a little bit of that uncertainty, and that's where they'd be great in sales, right? Because it's more of a game for them. But there's still systems and processes around that, right? I am curious, based on your full circle business model, how does goal setting factor into that? Because there's systems and processes, and then there's company goals. And you mentioned a 90-day, world. What does all of
Right.
that look like from the goal setting standpoint?
So for me, I like plan the whole year and then I kind of like break it down into smaller chunks. So we know what our overall end of the year top line revenue goal is going to be and what it's going to take to get there. And then from there, I go from, all right, here's my yearly plan, here's my quarterly plan, here's my monthly plan, and here's my week by week to-do list. So I say, like, if you can win the week, 1 week at a time, then you win the month, then you win the quarter, then you win the year. But I think you have to have a big picture end goal. But if you're worried about, you know, the $4 million you want to have on December 31st, on, January 2nd, you're going to be stressed all year long, as opposed to, okay, so I've mapped it out. And I tease, like, for me, we have a budget we work through every year and adjust. And I like to play the what if game. So, like, if you want to hire somebody, what happens? What if I add, a salesperson? What if I add 2 more employees? What if I add overhead? And you can kind of, I'm that person that's always, there's no reason in this day and age with all the technology we have not to be able to project and play around with numbers and see what would happen. So I do that at the beginning of the year. And then, like I said, have that big year end goal, but then we're going to get there little by little, as opposed to trying to worry about $4 million all at once. So I'm like, no, this week I need to sell this much. And then if I sell this much the next week, and also just knowing, um, which is why it's a circle for me and not a line, it's all connected and it's all cyclical. So there is a seasonality to our industry. And so we know in, the first quarter, we're not going to get to the same total revenue number that we're going to get to in the second quarter and the third quarter. But as long as you're hitting the numbers and you know that if I hit these numbers consistently by the end of the year, I'm fine, and you're not stressed in November that now I got to make $1 million in 1 month, as opposed to I hit my goals, slowly but surely. So that's my process, is like big picture planning, and then let's make it more, reasonable and approachable by, focusing on a week at a time and a month at a time and a quarter at a time.
Yeah, I think it's the same concept as if you wanted to lose, 50 pounds. You don't try to lose
Right.
all 50 pounds tomorrow. It's, you set a goal and you identify what that process looks like to get there. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is they'll set a goal at the end of the year. They know what they want to be at towards the end of the year, right? But they don't know how they're going to get there. And it's just kind of like everything's on fire. Let's just put out that fire. And I think the worst thing as entrepreneurs that we can ever do is just try to stay busy, because that's that trap that we fall into. We're always problem solvers. We look for a new problem to solve and we hammer that down and we move on to the next problem, but we're never actually working on the business and really growing it and scaling it.
Mm.
And I think your mindset of forecasting and playing with the numbers, I could get lost in a spreadsheet. I love that kind of stuff. But it's just breaking that goal down and identifying where you need to be and what if this happens, what can we do instead? So
Right.
important. But let's back up a little bit, because your book, you have a system in place that has helped you guys scale. What does
Yeah.
that look like? You mentioned it's not for everybody, but if I were a painting business, that may fit into that model. I have a few crews. I'm struggling. I'm putting out fires constantly. How can your book help me? Where does it start?
Yeah, so the book is on leadership. The rest of the stuff right now, and it's on the to-do list, but it's all so there's on-demand courses, or I have a YouTube channel, I have a blog, there's a whole bunch of different things on my website where you can get information depending on kind of age and stage. And I'm actually revamping a bunch of things, so there'll be some new and fresh and easier ways to navigate in the next week or so. But it all started with the circle for me. So for us, the goal was, and I tell everybody I work with, if you are in residential painting especially, but commercial as well. But if you're in a business where you have the opportunity to have repeat customers, like that's where you need to be focused. Like you should be making sure that, and we call it like the John Neal painting experience. And so in the circle, it's the exceptional customer experience. How do you make sure that from start to finish, each and every customer has an exceptional experience, and the next time they need paint, they're going to call you, and the next time a friend says, "Oh, I need a painter," they're going to recommend you. That's the ultimate goal. And I tease that, like, everybody's like, "Oh, I've got somebody great on the phone," and they're like super friendly and chatty, and like, okay, so what happens after that? So for me, the circle has 8 stops on it, and you'll like that the very top of the circle is advertising and marketing, because if you don't have leads coming in, it's really hard to sell. And so for every stop along the circle, there's a system or a process or a checklist or a script that I've kind of created already. And like I said, I always tell people to tweak them to make them work in their own world. Um, and so advertising marketing is first. Then we have that initial call. How are you handling that? And as your business grows, in our world, the person that answers the phone is not the person that does the estimate, is not the person that comes to do the work, is not the person that sends you the bill. So we actually have a big enough company now where we have a lot of different roles and responsibilities. So you get your advertising marketing down, you have a system and a process for that. You get the initial call, that phone script, you're asking the right questions and setting the estimator/salesperson up for success so that they can ring the doorbell and just continue the conversation. Then you have a process for that estimate, and the sale and the follow-up. And I think a lot of people, that's another place they drop the ball, is they go do the estimate, they send it out, they follow up once, and then they like, oh, well, they didn't call me back, so I'm gonna I'm not gonna worry about it. And life is crazy. I know I'm the same way. Like I had my roof done a couple years ago and got my estimate, and I'm like, I'm not ready yet. He's like, it doesn't matter, just get the estimate, look it over, tell me yes, and then you can tell me when you want me to schedule you, but at least, keep your name on the pipeline so that we don't wait 6 months before we get back to you, kind of thing. So, and then that goes into scheduling, and this is where our biggest hiccup was. You were talking about those problems where you're gonna, like, it keeps coming up over and over and over again. Ours was with scheduling and confirming with customers. So we have a system and process for that now. And then you move into production. And this actually, when we shared it with the guys, the part of the goal with that was to show them how critical they are in the circle. So a lot of times your painters don't think, oh, it's not a big deal. I just show up and paint. And like, no, you're there the most and the longest and have the most interaction with the customer. So for them to realize that your piece of that circle is super, super critical and super, super important, it was really important to us. And then again, like I said, you move into billing and collections and make sure you're doing it accurately and you're doing it in a timely fashion and you're closing things out and you don't have, to chase money. And then customer satisfaction, and now all of that's Google reviews. But again, making sure that you close down the job well. In our world, we call it winning the customer. So we want you to become a customer for life. We have a customer, actually, we just photographed her house. This is house number 3, and I think it's like 30 years we've been working for them. So they've, every time they've gone somewhere, they've taken us with them. And so, like I said, if repeat business is possible in your world and you're not making that happen, you're missing out on a very, very easy sale and a lot of opportunity. And then the last piece is the follow-up and referral. And so like I call it the soft touches and staying in touch with people. It's funny but not funny. A painter friend of mine said he painted a house 7 to 10 years go by, which is normal and average. You should get a good, longevity out of your exterior paint job. And the guy calls him back for another estimate, but he couldn't remember who painted his house the last time. So he got 3 quotes because he couldn't remember that the one guy was his painter. So just staying in touch, those soft touches in between, so that when they do need something, they remember you is important. So like I said, it's 8 stops. It's a circle. You start over again and you just kind of keep going. And the goal is that the systems along the way internally make it easy to deliver a really great external experience.
I love the fact that you use the word exceptional customer experience. I want to tell you a little story about a business coach of mine. I flew out to Las Vegas to attend one of his events, and he had to sit down and come up with a good customer experience. Like, what does that look like to you? We wrote down some stuff, following up, calling on time, delivering projects on time or before schedule, whatever that looks like, right? It's like, okay, great, great. What does a great customer experience look like? And then, we start saying stuff like, maybe we can help offset some of their ad spend, or, pay per lead or whatever. Like, that's a great customer experience that might be just outside of reality. And then we felt pretty good about that, right? And then he's like, all right, guys, let's go back to the drawing board. If money was not an issue, if the laws of physics did not apply, what does an outstanding customer experience look like? You can bring back Elvis from the dead, whatever it is, like, what does that look like? And people are throwing out ideas like, we'll buy their customers, we'll market for free, and we'll send them to the moon. And, the point of that exercise was not to come up with wild ideas. It was to say, maybe we can't send them to the moon, but maybe we can send them a card saying, we're looking forward to taking you to the stars. It's that idea of the fact that there's always something else you can do to win a customer. And to your point, that is the easiest business to recapture. So, I want to kind of dive into the weeds there a little bit, because you touched on a lot of things that I think are really important. Starting with the phone call. So, what does the initial phone call look like? Do you guys pre-qualify? What kind of questions do you ask to give your salespeople ammunition going into that estimate?
So a couple things. We've been around a really long time, so we're pretty well established and people know who we are. And I tease that, like, when I would tell people what I did and where I worked, they're like, "Oh, we see your signs everywhere and we hear you're expensive." And I'm like, "Yes and yes." And there's a reason for that. Um, with the marketing, and now I tell people our marketing is hyper targeted, and I know you'll appreciate this. I'm in charge of the marketing. I'm also in charge of finances. So like I don't like wasting money. So for the most part, you're not seeing us any in like your world unless you are willing and able to spend the money to have us come be your painter. So they're like, I tease, we don't market in my neighborhood. Obviously, we paint in my house because I'm the only daughter, and like my daughter is the only granddaughter. So when she wants to change color in her bedroom, I'm like, well, call pop up. He'll take care of you.
Absolutely.
So we do not, and I've gotten really good about it. And like I said, that's the term I use now. Like it's hyper targeted. I don't want to show up somewhere that it's not a good fit, because it's a waste of our time and money, and then it's a waste of your time, and then you're like maybe gonna badmouth me on the other side. Oh, I called them and they refused to come out and look at me. So um, very, very hyper targeted on the marketing. So very few calls come through to us that have to get weeded out because of that. But again, that took time. Like we've been in business, I've been running the marketing for the last 20 years. That wasn't the case in year 2 or 3. We were still doing a little bit more vetting on the phone. But so now when you call, it's a conversation. So first thing we ask, if somebody says, "Hey, I'm calling and I want to have, some painting done, have we worked with you before?" And if they say yes, we have a database, we pull them up, we can reconfirm, are you still at this address? Is it still the best contact number? And skip through all of that, like, checklisty kind of stuff, and just get right to the meat of it. If they say no, then obviously we're going to gather some information, but we do it in a way that's conversational. So it's not like I'm reading down a script and asking you, okay, what's your name? What's your address? What's your phone number? What's the best email? Like we make it a conversation and start to have, we tease that first phone call is the initial impression. And like, that's how you get them kind of through and ready for the estimator to show up and have the next conversation. Two things we always ask about, which are really helpful, are like colors, an idea. Do you have an idea of what kind of colors you're thinking of doing, if you're changing them or if you want to match what's there? Is that something you think you might need help with? So the more you can get people visualizing their job, because we're in a visual industry, the easier it is to have it not feel like a sales call. Um, and just like I said, again, going back to DISC, depending on who you're talking to, they're going to give you a whole lot of information, or they're going to be like, so ATs now with the estimators, I'm like, if you get your, spec sheet for your estimate and it's not a lot of information, please know that it was because the other person did not want to tell me anything. They're like, just send the guy when he gets here, I'll explain it all then. And I'm like, okay. So we always make sure we get contact information. So, phone and an email, because we're going to send you a confirmation that this is your date and time. Again, that's part of the system. And I always try to ask reference. And we don't say like, I always ask towards the end of the conversation. One is emails. People guard their emails a little bit now. So I'll ask at the end of the conversation, would you like us to email the estimate to you when it's ready? As opposed to, can I have your email address? Because then they're like, you're going to put me on a list and you're going to spam me for the next 10 years of my life. And sometimes we have older customers that are like, I don't really use email. I'm like, fine, no worries. We'll put it in the mail, or, we'll bring it back to you. And then always ask, do you mind if I ask how you heard about us? So it's kind of getting that reference, but doing it in a way where it's not like too kind of pushy and salesy. It's just a conversation. And then again, that sets the estimator up for the more information you can give him. We have 2 estimators now. When they get to the door, they're not asking the same questions. They're moving into, so, all right, we were redoing the kitchen. You want to paint the cabinets. Looks like you're a little bit concerned about color and sheen. How can I help? What can we talk about? And so it kind of primes them for an easier process once they set foot on the property.
So good. I love it. And I do want to, you mentioned you've been marketing for, you said 20 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm older than I look,
No, so the reason I asked the
thankfully.
question is because the I think the mindset, not only in this industry, but just for marketing in general, is like you're taking some money, you're going to the casino and you're going to gamble. And if you don't win immediately, you're going to walk out and complain. And that mindset of quick wins, like I need an immediate return, is mainly due to, I think, a lot of people stretching to afford marketing, which is where we like to work with people who were just one drop in the bucket of their overall marketing strategy. But let's talk about that a little bit, because marketing does take time. I equate it to like a retirement account or the stock market. You don't look at it
Mhm.
every day and jump over a slow month, or there's always going to be tweaks that can be made. When you get to the point of years or decades of marketing, you have that pretty well dialed in, where the pre-qualification process isn't even there anymore. But let's talk about what works best for you. You've been doing this long enough in a city that is so diverse, right? You got North Philly, South Philly. I've lived in that city for several years before, so I understand there's different pockets like any other metro area. How do you get targeted? What strategies are working best for you today, particularly on the cold lead side? Obviously, referral,
Right.
repeat, word of mouth is pretty straightforward. But for new leads that you haven't talked to before, what's working for you?
Yeah, and I'll share on my circle. So the under advertising and marketing, s- the 4 words for you. One is budget, which I think a lot of people don't spend enough time on when they do their overall yearly budget. And so what I end up doing is it's a percentage of the total revenue. And we kind of land between 5 and 6. I could say it's anywhere from 3 to 7, depending on the size of your company and what you can afford. Um, but if I'm taking 6% of my revenue to budget towards marketing, then I'm also breaking that down into all the different activities. So some things cost more than others. So this probably marketing is either time or it's money.
Yep.
So the bulk of our marketing budget probably still goes to direct mail, but I have a system and a process and it works. So like that costs more money, but it consistently brings us, like you said, those cold leads. That works well for us. So it's budget, plan, execute, and then the one I think a lot of people forget, and I'm sure you're really good at reminding them of, is tracking. So you have to give it time, but you also have to track it. So we've done things, and I always tease it, like, so we have our bread and butter things that we do year over year. It's in the budget line item, no issues, no questions. And then I always save some money for new opportunities, because you never know when something's going to come up and you have an opportunity to try something new. And you're like, well, I spent all my marketing money, so now I don't have any money to try this new thing. But if you are going to try something new, give it time, track it, And if it works, great. If it doesn't, be willing to cut it when, as soon as you can. But generally speaking, I think you got to give something at least 5 or 6 months. I've heard people about direct mail. I mailed a postcard once and nobody ever called me. I'm like, yeah, that's not quite how it works.
No, not.
So ours is, like I said, on a cycle, and I designed, and how now I used to do it all myself, and now I have a graphic designer so I have some help with that. Every 8 weeks, new card. So we're in the heart of the main line, Philadelphia, which is the suburbs, and then we're in Center City, Philadelphia, where like Rittenhouse and all the money is.
Yep.
2 separate cards, 2 separate audiences. We have the mailing lists, and it's just on repeat. But the thing that when I came in originally, we were mailing the same card over and over again, and it was very text heavy. And I'm like, we're in a visual industry, like we should be showing photos of our own work. So once a month, I go out with a photographer. We get to 3 to 5 locations. We shoot all the photos I'm going to need for the next month. So I have them all in the queue. And that allows me to, without being stressed out, handle postcards, have good photos to choose for that, cover all the social media. Social media is kind of like the bane of my existence now because you need so much content
I do.
to keep your feed full. So that's kind of where the system came in for the photos. I'm like, how do I make this simple? Because if like the job is finished and then I'm trying to run over it and photograph it, and then like another job is, I'm like, no, one Friday a month, I spend 4 to 6 hours with the photographer. We shoot everything. We're done. As opposed to, again, so that's me and like being systematized about it. And now I have everything I need for the next month. And it's not as stressful that way. So we do direct mail. We have all the social media stuff going on. We do e-news to all of our regular customers. A couple things still in print in like niche markets and areas that make sense for us and that are still reasonably priced. We actually have a commercial. So we looked into radio years ago, which is really expensive. And again, because of where we are and the map was too big. I'm like, I don't want us to be broadcast in New Jersey and Delaware and PA. Like that's not going to work for our business because we want to stay centralized in a certain area. So we looked into TV and the zones are much smaller and we can pick we're in. And it's funny because my rep for the first couple of years, he's like, what about this? I'm like, no, that zone covers a third of where we go, and the other 2/3 we don't work that far away. So that's not doing me any good to have my commercial show up an hour and a half away from the shop location. So everything's hyper targeted and focused on where we want to be and who we want to be in front of. And Philly, huge sports town, so we do in-game spots in a lot of Sixers, Phillies, Eagles, a lot of golf, tennis. Like we'll pick things like the Olympics are coming up, so we might do some stuff in the Olympics. And that was not as expensive as I thought it would be. And again, we're able to hyper target it. So just staying open to possibilities and options. And then we do a fair amount of kind of like charity work where we'll do sponsor something in the local community. So I think we're doing an event coming up later this month, which is around a food bank that's in one of the neighborhoods we work in, and kind of, promoting, making sure that everybody gets well taken care of. And we're doing something in the summer at one of the local libraries, and so things that you can find that are not super expensive, but maybe a little out of the box, but get you in front of the right people again and from a different angle. I'm like, oh, like they're actually involved in the community. That helps as well on the marketing side.
I love it. I love all of that. I'm a big proponent of giving back and contribution. I think as business owners, we fail to recognize how much power and authority we can build just by giving back, right? And
Right.
I love that. Your direct mail strategy, I want to just touch on that as well. So audience personas, knowing who you're talking to, the fact that you send out 2 different mailers, the 2 different types of people. How did you get to that point? Like you need to know who you're sending to, what message to put on there. How do those differ? What does that all look like on your side?
So honestly, it came down to like literally the look. So Center City, Philadelphia looks very different than mainline Philadelphia in terms of the houses and just everything. And so it's funny too, because a couple years ago, we're photographing a Center City house and we get there and the guy's like, man, I really miss getting that house, the mainline postcards with the big houses. So we change the photos every card, and the branding stays pretty consistent. Um, and the copy is very minimal. And it's really just about the image. And like we've actually had people when our estimators show up, they like pull a stack of postcards out of that drawer in the kitchen, like, oh, I've been saving these because like, this gave me an idea and I was thinking about this. So yeah, it just really has to do with what it literally looks like in the different areas that you're going to be working in. So downtown, Center City, Philadelphia, 3, 4-story kind of, they're technically row homes, but they're like
Yeah.
gorgeous and like millions and millions of dollars, but a very different facade than a single home out here, kind of more in the countryside if you're moving farther away from the city. So just being, and we didn't do that right away. Like I said, we used to just send one card to everybody, and we kind of slowly got a bigger footprint into Center City. And then one day I'm like, all right, we should switch it. We should separate the lists, do 2 separate cards, and kind of really hone in on who the audience is and what's gonna connect with them. Like, oh, that looks like my house, as opposed to, oh, that's a pretty house. So it's just a matter of, like you said, time and awareness and just trying a couple of new things. What I tell people now, if you're going to try direct mails, quarterly. So send 4 cards a year. Like make sure your list is, at least 2,000, 2,500 people, and plan to do it 4 times a year and make sure that it's seasonal. So the card actually I'm sending today to the printer will go out over the next 8 weeks of May and June. The front is an exterior, and the majority of the card is the picture, like huge, as big as you can get it with very little copy. The back is a smaller interior picture because right now we're moving into exterior season, like heavy exterior season. So kind of I'm always cognizant of switching it up a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah.
And I always tell people too, and you probably do this as well with marketing, like you have to be thinking 4 to 6 weeks out. So if I get the card today, what do I want to be doing in 4 to 6 weeks? Like I want to be outside painting your house. I'll take it interior, but I really want to be outside painting your house until like in August, we might start thinking about putting interiors on the front because September, October, we need to start thinking about moving inside. So just again, having the system and rethinking and kind of planning ahead makes usually more successful in the marketing end of things.
Yeah, and, to your point, a lot of people do direct mail, but they'll send out one postcard, they'll measure, and they're like, "Ah, that didn't do much for me," and it's like, "No, no, this is brand awareness." To your point, people will take those postcards, they stick them in a drawer for when they're ready, and
That's right.
typically, when you're, acquiring leads, especially online, it is less about buying the leads today, you're buying tomorrow's job or the next day's job or the next month's job. And it's you have to measure that, and it's not a measurement over the course of a day or a week or a month. It's the measurement over the course of a quarter or a year that really starts to paint the full picture,
Right.
which does bring up a question. You, I presume at some point in the past, did one postcard for everybody. How did you identify that splitting that up into like kind of like micro targeting actually worked better? Did you, I assume that was all measured and you decided that that's worth the extra effort?
Yeah, and I think, like I said, we weren't really super heavy in Center City originally. We were more focused on the kind of the suburban side of the Philly area. Thankfully, we're in a very saturated market where there's plenty of customers to go around, depending on where you are, and what your kind of target audience size is. It kind of can differ. But we just got to the point where I think part of it had to do with I used to take photographs. My dad used to take photographs. We had kind of a background in photography from my college days. And then when we hired the pro, we're like, oh, well, now we're doing a professional. Let's see what happens. Let's get some more variety in, because that was the other thing too, was we tease like the traditional mainline house is like a beautiful stone house with the white, trim and the black shutters.
Yep.
And I'm like, so all of our pictures looked like that for a while. I'm like, okay, we can mix this up a little bit. So how can we do that? And so as we kind of got more and more into Center City and kind of build a little bit more of a presence there. Again, it's just like that awareness is how do I maximize my marketing spend by making sure the customer connects. So we already had the list, and it was just a matter of, all right, we're going to pull these. I think it's like 5 zip codes in Center City that we mail to. We're just going to pull them out of the main list and make a separate list. So it doesn't really cost anymore. It's just, now we're doing it in 2 separate places as opposed to everybody's getting the same kind of thing. And again, I always tell people too with the direct mail, as opposed to thinking about like how much money you're spending on these postcards and not getting a great return, what's your average job size? So if you spend a certain amount of money on a postcard and you get 2 jobs out of it that are your average job size or bigger, and you've made most of the time you've made a profit. So usually 2 to 3 jobs from 1 postcard mailing covers itself. And so it's just again perspective and how do I look at it a little bit differently. So you're like, oh, if I send 1,000 cards and I only get 10 calls, it's not really worth it. Well, how much were those 10 estimates worth? And if you close 3 of them, how much money did you make kind of thing. So it's just a lot of it is about perspective.
And I think you hit on a really good point, and that is cost per lead in the world of marketing is not the most important metric you need to be looking at. It is your overall cost of marketing, the return on investment, that bottom line number is the most important metric, especially when we talk about things like brand awareness. There's things that you might be overspending on, but it's things that might be driving down the cost somewhere else. And that
Yeah.
network effect is really hard to measure in some cases. I love the direct mail strategy when it's implemented right. I am curious though, based on that information and those numbers, on average, do you have a target KPI goal that you aim to hit with your direct mail campaigns?
Um, yes, and probably don't know what it is off the top of my head anymore. I tease that like in the beginning, I was so like on top of everything every month for tracking purposes, and now that like 20 years in, and I know what works and I know what doesn't work, I'm a little bit more lax with things. I do know though for us that like there was a time when if we were behind or if we missed a week, we used to use a mom and pop shop to mail the postcards and the phone would be quiet. So like that's our big thing is like looking at how many leads we get on average per week and like, oh, the phone's quiet this week. What happened? Is something not
Yep.
going out? Actually, and back to your point of the that whole pandemic surge, I'm like, that pace was not sustainable. It was nice while it lasted,
Yeah.
but that is not a sustainable pace to be working at. So, not having the panic moment of, oh, it's slow. It's like, no, it's back to kind of where it was. So for us, like I said, it's comprehensive. We've got, I think, and I actually have a checklist on a whiteboard in my office that I can see from my desk of everything that happens on a monthly basis for marketing. And like my favorite thing to do as a high SC is to be able to check something off. So there's probably 10 to 12 things happening every month in our world as far as marketing goes. And I know that as long as they're all happening consistently, we've got the leads coming in that we need and the quality leads that we need. So,
Love it. Yeah, and you're very much like my wife. She writes a checklist on a piece of paper and she physically checks it off to get that instant
okay.
gratification, that dopamine boost. I, on the other hand, do everything digital, so I don't get that same boost. But no, I think that's great. And after you guys have that follow up process built in, though, you mentioned that after you get through the estimate, you follow up then. Can you tell me just a
Right.
little bit about that? Because I think that's where a lot of guys miss the mark. They rely too much on automations and like the text messages and emails that go out to try to get an estimate to close. But there's certain industry standards around what your set rate should be and what your close rate should be. And a lot of these
Right.
guys are falling short and they're leaving money on the table just by not picking up the phone. So in your business, what has worked well for you guys?
Yeah, and the thing that helps now, I think for us, if you're still kind of small and doing everything, it can be a little bit daunting. And again, that's why like when I work with clients for on the productivity side, which is also something I help people with, I'm like, what does your ideal week look like is what I tell people, not day, because you're like you said, your to-do list on any given day could be a mile long and you're most likely even me as good as I am at productivity like I have 10 lines on my to-do list and very rarely do I get through all 10 things like whatever's at the bottom usually goes to tomorrow because it wasn't super urgent. But I always talk to people about like what does a really ideal week look like, and part of that should be blocking out an hour at least, and maybe it's on a Friday morning after you get everybody off to the job site where you come in and you just do all of your follow-ups at once. So when I talk about productivity, it's like grouping things together and doing them all at one time as opposed to one today, one tomorrow. If you do it all at once, you're much more productive and you kind of get into that rhythm and that flow. So our process is we do email estimates. We'll either the estimator himself or our, admin will call them and let the person know, hey, we did send the estimate today because sometimes still email doesn't go through and, or it goes to junk and they don't see it. So the estimate gets sent and you get a quick follow-up call. We send it over, take a look. If you have questions, please give us a call back. Happy to answer any of those questions. And then we kind of alternate back and forth between sending a follow-up email and then having another little phone call check-in. And we do that for like 2 to 3 months usually. And then we don't close everything out. So we always tease, like in the sales world, like a no is just as good as a yes sometimes, because at least you're not like wasting time anymore. But then we do have a process at a certain point where we'll say, we literally send either an email or a letter that says, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We're going to close this out. If something changes, please reach back out. And then sometimes people are like, no, 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 we really want to do the work. We just have been crazy. So again, just professional through the whole process and not overly pushy, which is I think why we alternate back and forth between a little quick phone call and an email reminder. Because like I said, life is crazy, and finding that balance is important. You don't want to be too pushy, but
Yep.
you also don't want to wait too long, because they called you in the first place, right? They obviously needed something done. And sometimes, especially now, like I can tell you as a mom with kids and like pets and a million things going in a million different directions, sometimes you kind of forget about something that you really do want to do, but it's not urgent in the same way that like a plumbing issue would be. I need you right now because I have water leak, as opposed to like I really want to update this room, kind of thing. So just again, figuring out a system that works well for you, and it's not going to be. I tell people too, like with email marketing, if you feel like you see a lot of opt-outs, then you're probably sending them emails too often. So
Yeah.
like tone it back a little bit. Or think like, how many times would I like you to contact me and how often in between? So I always tell my clients in the consulting world, like, think like a customer. Don't think like the busy, crazy business owner that you are. Think like a customer and what it's like to be on the other side and how would you like to be communicated with? Actually, that's a question we ask on that first call is like, what's your preferred method of communication? Do you want us to email you? Do you want us to text you? Do you want us to call you? Like, what works best for you? Is there a time of day that's good or bad so the more you can think like a customer and kind of tune into their world, the easier I think it is to be successful.
And it does bring up a question. How often do you email your prospects?
If it's every 2 weeks for like anywhere between 4 to 6 emails, depending on if they reply back, so obviously if they answer, then obviously we're not going to send it anymore. But yeah, so you've done the work, you might as well. And then what we'll do sometimes too is, when we get closer to winter, we'll go back through the open interior estimates and reach back out to those people like, hey, I know we came and looked at this a couple of months ago and you said you kind of weren't ready. We're getting into the winter season, going back inside, is this something you want to revisit now? So a lot of it has to do too with the estimator knowing, they kind of rate customers. Like this is a really hot lead, or this is a warm lead, or this is like maybe not an ideal fit and they may not really want us. They may be shopping kind of thing. So the estimator does a good job of keeping tabs on the viability of the lead. Um, and also if it's a regular customer, someone we worked with before versus a brand new customer we've never met, there's a different rapport with that person as well. So it's a lot of, I tease like when the disc training, we're talking about like there's a science to it, but then there's also an art to it. So it really is a matter of kind of paying attention to people and feeling out like what makes the most sense for them. But again, every 2 weeks, if you send a reminder email, they're not going to be upset.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I think it's so good. And the thing that I love about your model, the systems and the processes that you've built is the fact that you're not out there constantly trying to grab at new business. You are building up a database of raving fans that are either going to come back to you at some point in the future or they're going to refer somebody else that you didn't pay a dime for. And at that point, it's okay to overspend on a lead because you know there's going to be more on the other side of that. I think that's where this industry is leaving such a big opportunity on the table. But to your point, that all starts with a raving fan, an outstanding, exceptional customer experience. So, all right. So we talked through a lot here. If somebody was interested in learning more about how you might be able to help them, learning more about leadership, systems, processes, where would they start? How would they get in touch with you?
So the fullcirclebusiness.net is my website. And there's a ton of free resources on there already. Like I said, I'm in the process of kind of revamping a couple of things. Everything that I've done one-on-one with people in terms of courses, there's also an on-demand version. So if you're a good like self-starter person and you want to go purchase and just watch it all, so it's literally me on a Zoom recording, and then you get all of the downloads to go with it. You could do it yourself that way. And I use John Neal Painting as the example for all of the different, in the marketing. You'll get to see our postcards and our e-news and kind of how I've done all that stuff. And, on the system side, like I said, it's all there. I built it all out. I want you to take it. I want you to make it work in your world. So there's a lot of different ways to utilize it depending on where you are and kind of what you need. There is a free version of the circle without all of the details. But if you listen to the podcast and you hop over my website and you email me, I'll share the full circle with you as well. That has all of the little details below it as to what happens at each stop along the way. And then again, like I said, that course literally walks you through all of it and gives you the checklists and the templates and the tools to put them right into use right away. So that was my goal with the consulting, was to make it as easy as possible for you to add systems to your business without trying to figure out, where do I start? How do I do this? And like I said, it's all based on lots and lots of years of trial and error and and experiences, and I'm still in the trenches with everybody as we speak. So, but my favorite thing to be is helpful. So if you hop on my website and you shoot me an email, I will answer you. And if you want to do a quick check-in call, we can schedule a quick call and just chat. So I'm always happy to help.
Amazing. All right. So I always ask all of our guests on here to impart one last piece of wisdom on those listening in. If you could scream something from the rooftops that you wish every other business owner could hear that may benefit them more today, what might that be?
Oh, all right. Let's think. So I would say, again, back to like, what does your ideal week look like? So one of my specialties is like productivity, and I'm really great with like time management and like making sure I don't miss a deadline on things. So maybe they always tease like the fastest way to get something done is to slow down. I would encourage everybody, if you feel like you're in like helter-skelter chaos mode, to map out like what your week looks like right now, and then think about what would an ideal week look like for you, where I'm not chasing, around, chasing my tail and putting out fires all day, every day. And I always tell people to go back to like, there's like 6 key areas of the business. And so every week you should be spending a little bit of time in all of them. And I think a lot of us as business owners, we forget about working on our businesses and how important that is in the grand scheme of things. So take a look at what your week looks like right now. Is there a way to simplify it, group things together and make it more productive? Is there a way to delegate some stuff to somebody else on your team maybe, and give yourself some space to breathe? And don't forget to take a lunch break. I was the one that sat at my desk and ate with one hand and like figured something out I could do on the computer with the other. And I'm like, now I actually leave my desk, sit at the table, and then I walk the dog. So take a lunch break and breathe. That actually makes for a better day in the end, and a more productive day than if you're just trying to like burn through it.
Go on your lunch break. Go outside. Walk away from your desk. Yeah. That is a great point. I used to be that same person too, who would sit there and answer phones on my lunch break, and I realized if I just get outside and take a breath, I'm way more productive. And
in the afternoon.
To your point also, we say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You don't want to just always be that guy who's busy with their head chopped off, running around, putting out fires. So, Suhaiba, I appreciate you being here today. Anybody listening in, please go to the fullcirclebusiness.net. Check out what she has to offer. There's a lot of great value and information out there. Again, thank you for taking your time out of your day to be here and chat with us.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking marketing too. I know people think I'm a systems person, but I love marketing as well.
Well, we'll definitely have you back on to do a round 2 at some point in the near future. Thanks again.
Sounds good.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on that episode. I hope you guys enjoyed that chat as much as I did. Now, listen, if you guys are hungry for more conversations like this, go swing by our website. It's basecoatmarketing.com/podcast. And finally, we are very open to feedback. So if we haven't covered a topic or there's someone you want us to chat with, please let us know. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on the next conversation for painters.